Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona with this week's episode of Horses to Watch. Obviously, last weekend was the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival and tons of great stakes races at Belmont Park, and I want to take a look beginning with two of the stakes races from Saturday at Belmont that were run on the undercard, beginning with the eighth race on that card, the Woody Stevens, run at 7 furlongs for the three-year-olds, and we can pick it up right from the start, and you're going to see the number one horse, Honest Mischief, just miss the break by about a length to three-quarters of a length. That's not what you want to have happen when you're breaking from the rail in a large field of 11 horses with a ton of speed. Honest Mischief is one of the horses who figured to be pretty forwardly placed in this race. And what has to happen after this is Javier Castellano, his rider, is trying to regain that early position that was lost, and he has to leave the rail to do it. Now, if you watched a lot of the races on Saturday at Belmont Park, you saw that there was a rail bias on the main track. Now, there's some debate as to how strong that bias really was and how much it might have worked against certain horses, but it definitely worked against a horse like Honest Mischief, who was outside of both the 1 and the 2 path for almost his entire trip after that tardy break. You see he's moving 3 wide around the far turn here, and he's just having to move up into what was the fastest part of the race. This is a race that's going to be totally dominated by closers. The 3 horses towards the back of the pack are actually going to finish 1, 2, 3 at the end of this race, so the speed really does collapse, and it's just difficult for a horse like Honest Mischief to sustain his run after making that early move to actually share the lead at the quarter pole. It briefly seems as if he's going to go on and potentially win this race, but making that early move really takes its toll in the last furlong. I also think racing wide against the bias probably sapped his strength a little bit at the end of this race as well. Keep in mind, this is just this horse's 3rd career start. He was only coming off a maiden win. In my opinion, this was really not a bad effort, all things considered, and he's a horse that's going to run much better next time out. Now, obviously, if he shows up in a non-winners-of-one allowance race, he's going to be 1 to 5, so he's not the kind of horse you want to bet in that spot. But if Chad Brown continues to stay aggressive with him and runs him in a race like the Amsterdam or the Allen Jerkins, I think he might be every bit as good as all of the other 3-year-old sprinters out there. So Honest Mischief is a horse that I think you can give a pass for finishing 6th in this Woody Stevens. Next, we'll move on to the race that took place right after the Woody Stevens on the Belmont Saturday card, and it was one of the most talked about races from Saturday, the Grade 1 Metropolitan Handicap, which went as race 9. Another race that we can begin right from the start, because you'll see horses getting out towards the front end. The number 1 Coal Front shows a lot of speed. The number 3 Matoli is going to head out towards the front, as well as the number 6 Promises Fulfilled. Now, in the early part of this race, focus on the position that Promises Fulfilled gets into, because I know there's been a lot of talk about how well Matoli, the winner, ran, and I agree with all of that. The pace of this race is fast. There's some debate as to how detrimental it was to be in the 2 path on Belmont Stakes Saturday. The rail was obviously the place to be, but there were a number of horses that raced in that 2 path, just 1 path off the rail throughout the day that just did fine. We saw horses like Tax in the Belmont Stakes race in the 2 path. Later on in the Brooklyn, horses raced in the 2 path like Realm, that long shot, and he ran on well to be 3rd. So I don't think Matoli was really hindered by racing 1 path off the rail. On the other hand, Promises Fulfilled, he was 3 to 4 wide throughout this race, and I think he really was hindered by racing so wide. Promises Fulfilled is a speed horse. A mile is always going to be a stretch for him, and he runs pretty well to be chasing the pace throughout from a wide position, and he's only going to finish 4th in this race and not that far behind the top finishers. But the other horse that you really want to focus on, and the horse that was garnering a lot of the discussion after this race, is the number 2 McKinsey. Now, you see him in the red and yellow jacket towards the back of the pack, and Mike Smith is just going to have a really terrible time trying to find a clear path for this horse. He was riding the rail early, but he comes off the rail here, and he's going to try to go outside of Thunder Snow and inside of Promises Fulfilled, and that spot just closes up. Instead of moving outside of those horses, he goes back to the rail and has to briefly pause again right here. Then he has to move outside of Thunder Snow. He's finishing on best of all at the end of this race, and I don't think there's really any doubt that he would have won this race with a clear run. But the question is, how much really went wrong for him as opposed to how much went well for him? Because keep in mind, early in the race, he was riding the rail for about 5 furlongs. And that's right where you wanted to be. Also, this was a race that featured a fast pace that compromised horses like Matoli and Promises Fulfilled. And McKinsey, if he had won this race, he would have done so with a great trip riding the rail from off the pace in the early going. So I think McKinsey, it's frustrating that he wasn't able to win this race because the Metropolitan Mile is a prestigious race for horses at any level. well. But today was that day, and I don't think he's a horse that you want to give too much extra credit to next time he shows up, because all things considered, he earned one of his highest speed figures in this spot, so how much better could he really have run? But Promises Fulfilled is the horse that I would look for next time out, because he could be a decent price in races like the AG Vanderbilt up at Saratoga or the Grade 1 Forgo, and I'm not sure that he's really that much worse than Matoli right now, especially turning back in distance. So keep an eye on him in some of these big sprint races moving on later in the summer. The last race that I want to take a look at this week was not one of the stakes races. It's one of the races that took place earlier in the week at Belmont, and that was on Thursday, the first race of the week, going 1 mile and 3/8 on the turf course. We can watch it from the break. It's a longer race, and I want to focus on the number 5 horse, Crack Speed. Breaks fine, figured to be the speed of this race. This was actually his turf debut, and Flavian Prat was coming in from California, had never ridden this horse before, probably is not all that familiar with Belmont Park in general as a rider who rides mostly in California and Kentucky a little bit. And he just kind of loses control of this horse early. You can see in the early going, Crack Speed is way too headstrong. He tries to drift him out off of that temporary rail to get him to relax a little bit, but this horse wants no part of it. He just has his mind set on go, and he's not backing down. And at some point, you can see Flavian Prat just kind of drops his hands and lets this horse run out and set these insanely fast fractions for the distance. I'm sorry, I actually told us to highlight the wrong horse. We're highlighting the number 5, Crack Speed, in this race. Not a problem. He's the horse that's way out in front on the lead, and he's just going way too fast for the distance. Fractions like 23 flat, 47 flat. You just can't do that and go 1 mile and 3/8 on the Belmont turf course, especially over a turf course that had taken some rain early in the week. This wasn't quite the hard, firm turf courses that we were seeing later in the week, especially on Saturday, where they were running extremely fast times. And they were going to see a horse, Coolin Rock, make a run after him on the backstretch. And Crack Speed, for a second, looks like he's just going to completely fall apart and back up to finish last in this race. But he actually maintains his lead all the way around the far turn, and he loses at the end of this race and fades a little bit in the stretch. But considering how fast he ran in the early going, I think this horse actually did okay. Now, this was his turf debut, and on the surface of things, it doesn't look like Crack Speed has a ton of turf pedigree. On the dam side, it's really a lot of Argentine breeding, South American influences, pedigree that I don't know a whole lot about. But his sire is a horse called Easing Along, and Easing Along was a Phipps-bred horse who raced in this country, but has stood as a sire down in South America for his entire career as a stallion. And Easing Along has had a lot of success with turf horses. We've seen a few come to this country from South America that are by Easing Along. Horses like Suggestive Boy, who won the Kilroe Mile, a Grade 1 race a few years ago. Another horse who won the San Juan Capistrano a number of years ago. That's a Grade 1 turf route race out in California. So Crack Speed definitely has turf pedigree from his sire. Maybe he's just not a 1 mile and 3/8 kind of horse. I think he's going to do better turning back in distance in the future, because he ran a lot better than it seems in this race. And he's a horse that I would look for back on turf next time out, going like 1 mile and 1/16 or 1 mile and 1/8. So just a horse to look for that ran better than it seems in his turf debut. So hopefully we can make a score with one of these horses when they show up in the entries next time. Thanks for listening this week, and I'll be back again next week with 3 more horses to watch.